Welcome, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to get to join you here at Future Proof. Who's liking the outdoor beach feel to this? I'll admit, like my first time I get to do a presentation with like the ocean breeze coming in. I'm loving it here. So I wanted to take some time today and talk about marketing and talk about some of the, I think, sort of unique ways that our industry shows up in marketing relative to what you see more broadly in marketing if you look across other industries, other professions, other domains of the world besides our particular idiosyncrasies in the financial advisor world. And I want to start this discussion by looking a little bit at kind of the business of marketing, like how this works from just the pure economic realities of how we run advisory firms, advisory practices in our world. So imagine for a moment you have some new prospects. This is Gary and Jennifer. So Gary and Jennifer ran a local landscaping nursery business. They've done it for the better part of 30 years. They just sold their landscaping business for a cool $1 million. So they have spent most of their careers with moderate income and basically no assets because everything went back into the business. And now suddenly they have a whole lot of assets and no income. And they say, I need an advisor. I have no idea what to do. I've never had so much money I was responsible for. There's all these decisions. I don't know how to generate income from assets. I don't know what retirement looks like. I don't know what to do. And I have $1 million of cash. Otherwise known for most of us is fairly good client prospects here. Like this is a nice business opportunity for most of us. So at the proverbial 1% AUM fee, just because it makes the math a little nice and round and easy, like this is basically a $10,000 fee client for most of us. So the question I'll ask you to kick off the discussion today is if you put on your like sales and marketing hat as an advisor, how much would you spend on behalf of your business in sales and marketing expenses if you believe you had a reasonable opportunity to get Gary and Jennifer as clients? So I actually want to poll everyone and find out. So if you go to slido.com and you enter the little code, Kitces Future Proof. Alternatively, if you are QR code oriented, you can scan the QR code in the upper left there. So thank goodness technology is working because I see a couple results coming in. So do your own response before you look at everybody else's, please. What would you spend in this situation to get a client like Gary and Jennifer? So this is not a like guaranteed, there are no guarantees in marketing, but like you have a high probability expectation that if you spend on marketing, you can get a client like this. You can get this $1 million, $10,000 a year, all cash, just invest me and work with me for my retirement kind of client. What would you spend? So I see a flow all over the place. Not surprising. That's usually what I see when we do polls like this. So almost half of us are somewhere between about $500 to $2,500, right? Like about a quarter of us are $1,000 to $2,500. Another quarter are under $1,000. Now, notably, median overall, this weird thing on the polling, it sorts by popularity, not by dollars. There's also a less than 500 category. So if you kind of add up the bottom ones, about 55 to 60% of us are less than $2,500 here. Median's around 2,000, which actually is what I see pretty commonly. And then there's a small percentage of us at the other end of the spectrum, right? So 50% of us are about $2,000 or less, and 25% of us are $7,500 or more. Almost 10% or 10,000 plus. They would literally spend 100% of the client revenue just to get that client. So here's how I would look at this from the pure business perspective. This is a client that pays $10,000 a year in fees at the proverbial 1% fee. If you're running a 95% retention rate, fairly common for most of us for our long-term retired clients, some of us are even a little bit higher, but 95% retention rate basically means I have a client attrition rate of 5%. If 5% of my clients turn over every year, on average, a client stays with me for 20 years. Right? Which should feel pretty familiar for most of us with typical client tenures. So what that means is over the lifetime of working with this client, This is a $200,000 revenue client, right? It's like 20 years at $10,000 a year. To be fair, it's probably a little bigger with market growth, minus a little for withdrawals. Usually markets grow more than withdrawals. We could present value and mess with this a little bit, but like, you're gonna come up with something in this neighborhood. Now, to be fair, this is gross revenue, and if I actually want to keep the client for 20 years, I have to do like a lot of work for the client for 20 years. There's like advisors that have to do things every month and quarter and year all throughout this 20-year time period. So if I look at kind of industry benchmarking studies, median advisory firm at normal scale generates something in the neighborhood of 30% margins after all advisor comp and other business expenses. So if I'm generating a 30% profit margin on this is about a $60,000 lifetime profit opportunity. I get it over time, not all at once, but this is a $60,000 profit opportunity. And our median spend on this is $2,000. That strike anyone? That's the economics of it. If you really look from a pure business perspective, so in the business investing world, if you go out to like how private equity and venture capital firms look at this across any and all industries, there's a pretty standard formula of how this works. If at the end of the day, the lifetime value of a client is higher than what you spend to get that client, this is profitable. Strictly speaking, if I spent $59,000 to get this client, it is still profitable. Now, I'm going to be cash flow negative for 19 years and make all the profits in the 20th year. Not ideal for most of us from a present value of money perspective. But in theory, I could spend as much as $59,000 to get that one client, and I will be long-term profitable as long as I'm willing to wait 19 or 20 years to get to my profits. Most of us don't want to wait quite that long for a break even. And so from the business end, decide how many years you're willing to be negative before you turn positive on profitability defines where you would set your marketing costs. Now, when I look at this from the perspective of advisors and how we do this, to be fair, I do think we tend to undercount what we're doing in marketing. If you look at most advisory firms from just a P&L, a profit and loss perspective, it's very common to see that most of us spend no more than about 2 to 3% of our revenue on marketing. Occasional client events, CPA to lunch, maybe like I spend a little bit on a marketing thing to try out. But most of us spend a lot of time on our marketing, right? I do business development. I go to networking meetings. I build relationships with COIs. I do social media, writing or blogging or podcasting. If you do a content thing, like we spend a lot of our time on marketing, which I think really just comes out being a sort of indirect hidden cost of what we spend on marketing. So if I look at like a quintessential newer advisor, I'm going at this a year or two. I got like $8 million under management. After a year or two in the business, if I'm charging my 1% AUM fee, I'm getting $80,000 of revenue. If about 2/3 of my time is spent on some combination of clients and prospects, that's typical for most of us. Like you can't literally spend 100% of your time meeting with prospects or meeting with clients. There's like overhead management of the business, compliance, professional development, conferences. So most of us in the advisor world cap out somewhere in the neighborhood of about 60, 70% of our time that we're really meaningfully spending on clients and prospects, or in like a generic professional services context, like billable time for which we could generate fee revenue to do what we do. So if about 2/3 of my time is spent on clients and prospects, call that 1,300 hours a year, give or take a little bit, and I'm making $80,000 of gross revenue, my time as an advisor is effectively worth $60 an hour. It's just kind of how it maths out. So if I'm spending 2% of my revenue on marketing, I might only be spending $1,000 or $2,000 a year. But if I'm an advisor in a situation like this, I probably spend 2+ days a week just getting out there prospecting. I don't have a lot of clients yet. I have a lot of time. So like I'm doing a lot of prospecting, networking meetings, all the things that we tend to do as advisors. In the early years, if I'm spending 2 days a week on this, I might be spending 800+ hours on it, which means in practice, I'm really not spending 2% of my revenue on marketing. I'm spending like 60% of my revenue on marketing. Most of the revenue my clients pay me is being used to go out and prospect and try to get more clients. That's just kind of the growth cycle reality of our business. And it works very, very well as most of us are getting started, because most advisors, as we built historically, you don't exactly get a cushy salary while you're going out there and building your client base. You get the revenue you've gotten from your clients so far, which means your time's really, really cheap at the beginning because there's literally no revenue to compensate it until you get going. That's basically why this cycle works and why the industry has sort of perpetuated this growth approach. It's actually, in a strict sense, it's very cost effective, because the people who are going out to get clients are not getting paid a lot yet, so their time isn't worth a lot, so it's actually pretty cost effective to spend a whole bunch of time hunting and prospecting. So from the business perspective, if my young new advisor is out doing this and they manage to get 2 clients a month over the span of the year, 24 clients over the entire year, and their effective marketing cost was about $50,000, they're basically spending the equivalent of about $2,100 per client to get their clients. Now, of this, basically like $100 is marketing and $2,000 is the cost of their time for all the networking and the prospects and the people who said no to get to the people who said yes. But this works. Right, if I'm a newer advisor and I can get like a $200,000 client, it's a great client for a lot of us in the first year or two. $200,000 client gives me $2,000 of revenue at a 1% fee. So basically, this costs me $2,000 to get the client. I make $2,000 on the client. I more or less break even on my time in the first year. Every year after, this becomes more profitable for me. And as I add clients over time, if I can survive the god-awful first 3 to 5 years, I now have an advisory business that's growing and scaling. Sounding vaguely familiar? Hopefully this is like most of the past that we traveled as advisors if we built our businesses from scratch. This is the economics of the advisory business from just a pure nerdy mathematical sense, because that's how I like to tackle problems. Now here's where it gets interesting and starts to shift. So now we fast forward a couple of years. The advisor's up to $50 million under management. 1% fees, this is a $500,000 practice. 2/3 of their time, 1,300-ish hours a year on clients and prospects. This is now basically, your time is worth about $375 an hour, not $60 an hour. So if I'm still spending my traditional 2% of revenue on marketing, it's spending about $10,000, but I don't spend as much time on marketing as I used to. Right, I used to spend like 2 days a week. Now, if I'm lucky, I spend an afternoon a week, because if you hadn't heard, I have like $50 million and 100 plus clients I got to do service work for. It takes a lot of time. So my time allocation to marketing starts dropping because the practice gets busy, and the cost of my time starts going up because I got a lot of revenue now. So this practice might only spend 200 hours a year on marketing instead of 800 hours on marketing, but their marketing costs have actually gone up. Prior firm was spending $50,000 on marketing. This firm's spending $85,000 on marketing. 10 of it in dollars, almost 75,000 of it in time. So the business starts to shift. Now, in the aggregate, this is still a pretty good marketing spend relative to traditional business terms. This firm would effectively be spending about 17% of its revenue on marketing. And if you look across a lot of different industries out there, like 10 to 15% on marketing is not uncommon. This would actually still be a pretty proactive growth cycle. Now, the challenge from the business perspective, I'm only spending half a day a week on marketing instead of 2 days a week on my marketing now. Now, the good news is I've gotten a little more established. I got some referrals that are coming in. I'm a little more known in the community, so I don't quite have to do the amount of legwork and hustle to get clients. So this firm may not be bringing in 2 clients a month, but they're still bringing in 1 client a month. Pretty darn good growth pace. Now, relative to the amount of time and dollars that they were spending on marketing, this firm is effectively now spending $7,000 to get a client, because the cost of their time got very, very expensive. So if this firm we don't get $200,000 clients anymore, we get $500,000 clients. This firm now has a $500,000 minimum instead of a $200,000 minimum, and they're losing several $1,000s every client. It's a $5,000 client, and now has $7,000 in marketing costs. In fact, if you want to break even on this client, you need a $750,000 minimum, so you're not losing money on new clients. Anybody felt pressure to raise minimums as their practice grew? This is why. This is what's happening. I mean, nobody except nerdy people like me actually do it with math and spreadsheets, but this is what's happening subconsciously for all of us, right? You just start getting that feeling like this client just isn't worth my time they used to be worth my time, but now my practice is in a different place, and like it just doesn't feel very profitable to work with these clients that I used to work with that were so profitable. This is why the mathematics of marketing start to change, because our time gets exponentially more expensive as our revenue grows. And I mean, this is what the math looks like when you've got a $500,000 revenue base. For some advisors that have scaled themselves up further, or large ensemble practices that build in a higher net worth space, not uncommon to see firms that run $700,000 of revenue per advisor, $1 million of revenue per advisor, at $1 million of revenue per advisor, all these numbers double. So now all of a sudden it costs me $10,000 to $15,000 of advisor time to get a single client, and we all end up gravitating towards $1 million minimums. Collectively, this is what is creating, I think, this ongoing challenge around advisor marketing. So these are some numbers that come from an advisor marketing study that we did on the Kitces platform. So the way you read this, I'll actually start with the second bar over or from the left. That's the average, when you go through this math of the dollars that are spent and the time that's spent and the value of your time based on the revenue of your practice, and how many clients you got, this is the average client acquisition cost across the nearly 1,000 advisors that we measured. It's about $2,000. But because the value of our time gets so much more expensive, the third bar over is the client acquisition cost for a firm that has at least $250,000 of revenue. Goes from $2,000 to $4,000 because your time gets expensive. The right is a firm that has at least $1.5 million of revenue for their service team, and the client acquisition costs start blowing out to $7,000. And the fundamental problem that's emerging from this is that the marketing strategies that we have historically built are almost all time-based. Most advisory firms, at the end of the day, 10 to 20% of their marketing costs is dollars, and 80 to 90% of their marketing costs is the time that their advisors spend doing marketing. Except the bigger the business grows and the more clients they have, it basically anti-scales. The more successful your advisors are, the more expensive that becomes as a marketing strategy. And that's effectively what we see. So the chart that you're looking at here is you go from left to right, the firms get bigger. The firms on the left have less than $250,000 of revenue on an advisor service team. The ones in the middle are at least $500,000. The ones on the far right are at least $1.5 million of revenue. The yellow bars are what we spend on hard dollar marketing costs, and the red bars are what we spend on time-based marketing costs. And so as you move from left to right, the total marketing costs actually get bigger because they're becoming less and less dollar-based and more time-based. And this is essentially the trap that we put ourselves into. Literally, as our firms grow, marketing costs are going up. In a traditional sense of the word scaling, it's supposed to go the other direction. But when we build around time-based marketing strategies and then we're successful at them, almost by definition, the time gets more expensive and the marketing strategies start spiraling upwards in cost and create these pressures on the business where either we have to lift our minimums or we grow less or we start running cash flow negative. Now, when we started digging in to try to figure out, like, how do firms start overcoming this? What do they do differently? One of the most interesting effects that we found here, so what you're looking at here is of firms that are growing, what percentage of their growth came from referrals, good old-fashioned client referrals that we all love. The dark blue bars are fast growth firms. The rest is everybody else. And effectively what we find is the fastest growing firms rely on referrals the least. The fastest growing firms rely on referrals the least because they don't scale. It's another version of the same problem. At some point, my client has referred like every reasonably affluent person that they know. That well starts to go dry, and then the referral flow stops, or at least slows down, and then all I can do is go out and spend my time getting more people, except that doesn't work because my time got really, really expensive. And so what we find is the growthiest of the firms move away from referrals and move away from time-based strategies because they're not scalable. And we start going into basically anything else that we can find. And the thought that I leave you with in this discussion here, and then we'll have some time for questions. So when we look at this in the aggregate for the industry, to me, this is one of the most striking, pure economic arbitrage things that exist in our industry. The average advisory firm spends about 2% of its revenue on marketing. The average PE firm will buy that revenue for more than 200% of revenue. Right, that's 2x revenue. In fact, these days it's more like 250 to 300%. So we spend 2% of revenue on marketing, and a PE firm would buy the same client tomorrow for 100x what we spend on marketing. I find that to be a fascinating gap. I'll just kind of leave that out there to percolate for everyone. That the average advisory firm spends 2% of its revenue on marketing, and the average PE firm would acquire it for 100x that. So just ponder a little on what you spend in marketing for your firm. So with that, I'm happy to take some questions. I guess Nyle can help steer us on the question-y process from here. All right. Test 1, 2. Mine works.
It's that on switch.
Oh, it's a good trick.
All right, so if everybody wants to go to Slido, we want to make this interactive. If you have any questions, we'd love to be able to bring them up. If there's anybody who's squirming in their seat because Michael is speaking directly to your soul right now,
I'm sorry.
Now's the time to ask these questions. Otherwise, if you see him on the boardwalk, I hear it takes them at least 3 hours to get from here to breakthrough, as people have some amazing questions. And it's easy to recognize with your staple blue.
Yes. Yes, which, as you can see, I stayed like very loyal to, despite the Southern California sun.
So I'm going to be a little bit selfish here and ask you, where do you typically see that resistance level where things start to changing? I think you've talked about it, like the valley of despair, maybe you called it once. I'm not sure, I'm paraphrasing, where you go to a certain size and you have to compete for bigger and bigger clients, but you don't have the resources that really large firms do. Where do you see that point where the resistance happens, where people can kind of get ahead of what's going to come to them?
There's usually a couple of different inflection points that tend to come up with firms, either around kind of how we're scaling our growth in general, how we're scaling our marketing in particular. The first crossroads comes just the moment you decide it's going to be anybody besides just you that you've got to support. Like for anybody who's ever going down that road, like the first time you have to think about actually making payroll for a full-time employee, like everything changes around your practice, when it's not just like gross revenue minus whatever your expenses are to run the business, and everything else just sits in my bank account. As long as my bank account goes up, my business is profitable. All of a sudden, there's like I have to worry about making payroll. So I care about the stability of my revenue differently. I care about my growth cycles differently. And because I've just introduced a certain level of fixed overhead costs, the moment we hire tends to be the point where we say, well, now I'm going to have to take a hard look at who I'm serving and whether all these can actually be served profitably. Because when I just had spare time, like sure, I got more time than clients. I'll take pretty much anyone. The moment I'm actually paying payroll to another person to service these people is a good moment to say, like, so is this actually profitable? Like, am I spending more money to hire a person to service the clients than I'm actually getting from the client? So the first crossroads tend to come just when it goes from anything that is us to not just us and more team members. The second crossroads tends to come when we hit our individual capacity as an advisor. We say, like, I've leveraged myself up. I've got, like, me. I've got my admin support. I've got my associate advisor. Like, I'm, like, super leverage powered me, which depending on your clientele, for a lot of advisors, that's $500,000. That can be even $1 million to $1.5 million of revenue. But at some point, like, there's just literally only so much time you can be awesome for your super awesome clients with all the people around you to support them. I kind of envision it's like the doctor that has like 8 nurses that come in to do like every single part of the process. So the doctor has it honed down to the 3.2 minutes that they have to talk to you to do the doctor part, and they move on to the next level. But at some point, they just can't get it down to 3.1 minutes. Like this practice is as tuned as it can be. And you have to decide if you're going to hire another advisor, and that tends to be the next major crossroads. And once advisors go through that, if you decide to go through that and start going multi-advisor and hiring career tracks, it actually runs for quite a long ways after that.
So I'm going to kind of combine these two that I'm seeing on the screen here. So the 2 questions that I'm seeing, how much would you recommend a firm spend on marketing? And I'm seeing that as probably a % of recurring revenue on an annual basis. Yeah. Doesn't having lower salary employees do the marketing numbers look better because you're offsetting maybe that scale that's coming? And the one that I would add in there is just, what are the health, if you had a health dashboard of a firm, what would be that metric that you would want to look at a CEO level, probably monthly? What's our health status on marketing? When I'm spending money, is this working right or is it not working right?
So, lots of good questions there. So I'll start in just like marketing spend. So first of all, in the purest sense, like, well, what you spend depends on, truly no joke, like how fast do you want to grow? How much do you want to grow, right? Some of us get to a point like, my practice at a pretty good place. I make pretty good money. I really don't actually need to grow all that much anymore. So like, don't spend a lot on marketing, because if you do, you'll just grow. And who wants that if you're already making all the money you wanted to make? Early on, we tend to do a lot of time-based strategies because we just got a lot of time and not a lot of clients. So that's pretty easy to invest into. When you look at advisory firms, they're just trying to do sort of a steady state, healthy growth. What I see most advisory firms that are doing it in a healthy way at the end of the day, total marketing spend ends out something in the neighborhood of 15% of revenue. And on average, they're able to actually generate at least $1 of revenue for every dollar of marketing that they spend. So they'll spend $10,000 of revenue to get a $10,000 client. You don't make anything the first year, very profitable long term when we have high retention rates. If I spend 15% of my revenue, that basically means I grow at 15% organic growth rates if I can like generate that ROI on my marketing spend. If I grow at 15% organic, my firm doubles in 5 years, right? Just sort of like rule of 72, 15% growth rates, I double in 5 years. And just from running a professional services firm, right? The reality, the moment you decide to go multi-advisor, you have to deal with that whole thing known as career tracks. Like, you hire younger people who are growing as advisors, and it turns out like they want jobs and promotions and the ability to move up and make their career here at this firm. And if you want to make that work as a business owner, you have to grow at a fast enough pace that by the time they've been doing this for a couple of years and like they're ready to move up to the next chair, you've had enough growth in clients and revenue that there's a chair for them to move into in that lead position. And so just what I see in practice is 3 to 5 years is often really what it takes for an advisor to kind of learn all the stuff they need to learn, the technical stuff, the client communication, the rest, to be able to move to the next chair of at least being responsible for clients. Maybe they're not bringing them in yet, but if you give them a client, you can confidently say like, this is your client now. You're going to meet with them. You're going to lead them. You're responsible for retaining them. I'm not going to be in the meetings anymore. If you just look like, how long does it take to get us there confidently? Often that's 3 to 5 years, usually closer to 5 than 3, but some people grow fast. If I'm spending 15% of my revenue on marketing and I can get a 1-to-1 return on my marketing spend, I essentially double the firm in 5 years, which means I double how many advisors I need, which means associate advisor will have a chair to move up to. And just the system of the firm tends to kind of revolve on a good basis at that point. 15% marketing, 15% organic, 15% organic, I double in 5 years. I double in 5 years. I've got room to move my advisors up by the time they're ready to move up. And then I get to the next 5 year cycle and repeat it. So different goals will vary, but like that to me, it's a pretty healthy benchmark of just thinking about it purely from the business owner perspective of how am I building and trying to scale my firm.
Awesome. So this next one I'm going to tie into too. So the question is, what marketing tactics have you found to be the most successful for high growth firms that rely less on referrals? But I'd like to rephrase it as, because tactics come after strategy, and that's going to be different for every firm. But when you say spending money, I would call them like, what engines are money being deployed to that is working well?
Good question. So broadly speaking, there are a couple of general categories where marketing spends are happening, where dollars are being deployed well. The first I will broadly characterize as content marketing. So I'm making some kind of content, I'm putting it out there into the world. It's how people become aware of my firm, and then they go through some kind of funnel process where I drip on them and they learn more about me and they get familiar with me and then they decide to do business with me. So content varies greatly by firm. Like, if you like writing, this is probably a blog. If you like talking, this is probably a podcast. If you love being in front of the camera, you might be doing this as a YouTube channel. But some kind of content we're putting out in the world where the world can find its way to our content, and then we drip them through. That's sort of one one category of stuff, and there's a couple of marketing things that go with that from a spend area. Notably, that's usually not like advertising type spend. That's more like, I've got a podcast producer or a video producer. I've got an email marketing person who takes all the people who are signing up for my list and kind of like moves them through a funnel. So a lot of firms that build in that area tend to do it more with staff hiring. Like that's where the marketing dollars go, but it's very scalable. Once I built my staff to do my content thing, like whether I'm getting 1 lead a month or 10 leads a month or 100 leads a month, like it's the same person that hits send on the email. So it's extremely scalable. The second category that we see is, I'll just broadly call like the lead generation platform. So the Smart Asset, Ramsey Smart Vestor, Zoe Financials of the world, they do work. The math does work. We see that pretty clearly when they do the marketing research. Depending on which platform you're using, it's not necessarily the highest of hit rates, right? It might be like, I'm paying $100 a lead and 95% of them don't work out. But if I pay $100 a lead and 95% of them don't work out, that means for every $2,000 I spend, they do work out. And if I spend a couple hours of my time doing that, I'm probably a couple $1,000s in between spend dollars and time dollars, and lo and behold, I'm like $3,000 to $5,000 of revenue per client. And if I get a $500,000 client, this is profitable with the one-to-one spend. So we see a cluster of firms that are doing kind of the paid lead generation services. Nice thing about them, very scalable. Like, you want to double your growth rate, just double the check that you're writing for how many leads are coming in, right? If I want to double my growth rate with client referrals, I can ask twice as often, but it's probably not going to really double my growth rate. If I'm paying for leads, I just want to like dial up the spend dial. I can do that. Like, that's a very easy dial to turn. The third broad category I would probably highlight in this context is just firms that do some kind of education event-based marketing. So historically, this was a seminar, like local seminars, local educational events. Maybe you do that in the local community college. Maybe you do that in the dinner seminar format. Maybe you just do that in direct mailers out to people. Those strategies work. They still work. They're notwithstanding the digital realm that obviously I'm very passionate about. There's still a subset of people that really do show up to local event marketing. To me, just the most fascinating part of it, if you really look at the strategy we find that actually has both the most successful people and the least, two strategies we see that have both the most successful advisors and least successful advisors in the exact same category. The first is social media. Some of the biggest firms have the most wild success in social media, including our co-hosts here from the Ritholtz firm. And then our data shows about 70% of advisors that do social media marketing literally get 0 clients in the entire year that they do it. So social media marketing, extremely polarizing. Some people absolutely crush it. Most people really, really struggle. And the other one, fascinating, at least to me in modern era, that it sits on that polar extreme, good old-fashioned direct mail. Most advisors struggle mightily with it for, I think, probably all the stereotypes that a lot of us queue up around direct mail marketing. But if you look nationwide, does anybody know the #1 largest organic growth-driven RIA in the entire country? Fisher. Anybody still get their direct mail envelopes? You know why they're sending direct mail envelopes after 30 years?
Because they work.
They still work. Yeah, one of the tricks in the marketing world, if you see a marketing strategy that looks really dumb and you keep seeing it over and over again, pause and say, what if they figured out that it's working? Because they wouldn't keep spending all that money doing it if the thing wasn't working. Now, they have a highly honed machine about how they do it because they got 20, 30 years of reinvestment into refining those systems. But I find it fascinating. The #1 largest pure 100% organic growth, absolutely no M&A or the rest growth firm has just spent 30 years direct marketing the bejesus out of every zip code in the country and spending money on it. And it works. And it's all dollar based. You want to dial up your growth rate, double the mailers and add in new zip codes. Right? It's extremely scalable because you can turn a dollar dial much faster than you can turn a time dial. So those are probably the big areas we see from a category level. There's a content focus, there's a pure lead gen focus, and then there's kind of the event-based targeted marketing outreach kinds of things that we spend on. That's the big 3 clusters that we see for most advisory firms.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for your time. If you want to learn more, Kitces.com is an encyclopedia of knowledge on all of this stuff. Thank you so much for gracing the stage.
Thank you. Thank you for having
And
me out.
everybody, you're going to have to book it to Breakthrough if you have meetings right now. So you have 5 minutes to be able to get down the boardwalk. Thank you so much.